I'm going to explain to you the reason why I put this webinar together. Um, we are approaching the summer. It's now May, mid-May. Weather is getting better. Um, Here in the U.S., the trees and the plants are starting to bloom. Leaves are coming out. Everything is getting greener, and nature is just taking its course. This also means with the summer that we are probably going to have a lot more vacations. People will take time, either they're off from school and families want to go on vacation, or individuals just want to go travel. And uh, the reason why I'm using Italy specifically is because Italy so far has been one of the more extended trips that I took in my photographic career. I went to Italy last May, but just actually about a year ago from now. And so um, I thought, all right, let's focus on images from Italy, but tie in certain concepts that I researched prior to going abroad to Europe. So the reason why I went to Italy primarily was to actually help film or document a photography lesson for Kelby training on travel photography. And the person here, I'll actually just go into a lights out mode so that we can see everything a little bit larger. And I'll just scroll through instead of having it automate on a slideshow. So this is Jack Hollingsworth, and he's a photographer based out of Austin, Texas. He's a great guy. His chops were in stock photography, but he also does what he calls lifestyle photography, which is very cool. And so he had to put together a small team of 3 people, who you can see 2 of them over here, who we're gonna use video as well as photography still images to document the process. So back here, this is Jack. He was the head of the production. He's like I said, a Texas-based photographer. And then this is Callie, who is kind of like the assistant of the group. And then that is Paul, who was the director of photography. My role was more to capture um, the B-roll. Any good production will have their main video and then B-roll, which is the stuff in between. Also, I was just developing an HDR program in Italy, so that helped as well. So I'm just going to go through again. This is Callie, and that's Jack. This is us kind of recording. And again, just to acclimate you to why I was in Italy. It wasn't a vacation at all. It was actually, a lot of work. But by work, I meant like 16 to 18 hours a day of shooting and editing. So that's paradise for me. And so, we go to this little gelato place. It was amazing. The gelato in Italy, I mean, was amazing. And so that's the team right there walking. This is Ponza, the island of Ponza, our first stop. All right. So I know a lot of people like to go on cruises. Depending on the type of boat you have or the ship that you're on, you'll either have this kind of scenery or not. But one of the things I wanted to kind of tell you is I think a lot of times when people travel, they tend to just put on a wide angle lens and just shoot and try to get everything into the frame. And to me, that's, you might be missing out on some very cool potential abstract stuff. Especially if you're on a ship, say, for a week at a time. You go to your excursions for a couple hours of the day, but then you're also on the ship so much. So you want to get kind of familiar or kind of accustomed to shooting outside of the box, thinking outside of the box. Now, this shot here altogether is not touched. This is straight out of camera. I was just going through some shots. I want to start the webinar off with anecdotes, just looking at an image and giving you some ideas of what you should look out for, or at least try to look out for. This ship that I was on is called the Royal Clipper, and I think it had 4 masts and a ton of sails, and with that, a ton of lines. And so I looked up and I saw all these really awesome different lines. It was chaotic, and I found it really intriguing. So I just grabbed the shot. I know exactly what I'm going to do with this image when I have the time to process it. It'll probably be a black and white, ultra high contrast. So. Also, make sure when you're going shooting, this is just an HDR image. I don't even think I ever published this image because I'm not fully done with it. But don't be afraid to ask or to interact with the locals. And what do I mean by that? Well, originally this canoe, this boat here in the foreground was in the water. And I took some shots where I was standing closer to the shore here, but it wasn't very intriguing. I actually wanted to have some of that sand in here because I liked the play of the lighter color against the wetter sand, the darker color. So I had asked one of the local fishermen there, who I guess owned this boat, if I can just pull it out, because what this gave me was foreground detail. Never underestimate the use of foreground detail on a shot like this. If you're going to shoot wide, you probably want to have some sort of anchor in the shot, because without this ship, I don't think it would be as intriguing. It gives it a sense of scale, and it gives the eye a place to start. Like I could have even, if we kind of go out of this light view here and we go to the crop mode in Lightroom, if I wanted to, I could probably even crop this down tighter and then bring up the frame so that this is more in the corner of the frame. It works either way, but if you kind of got rid of it altogether, just assuming that I wanted to get rid of that the foreground detail, to me this is much less of an intriguing shot. It's not nearly as intriguing. So you want to make sure that, don't be afraid to ask people or to talk to them. Most people are actually extremely friendly, and I found that to be the case especially during my trips in Italy, the 2 weeks that I spent there. Don't also be afraid to kind of go outside of your comfort zone. This is just a tone mapped image. This was not processed, but this was also in, I think this was in Ponza or Sorrento. I can't recall. But the point is, we had stopped for, it was a tour bus taking us to a location, and we had stopped for a few minutes, I guess for a cigarette break. And so I ran out quickly and basically stood in the middle of traffic, and I'm totally not accustomed to you know, the different nuances of traffic in other countries. I barely understand it here in the US, but I wanted this shot of this sign just because the sign just screams European to me. We don't typically have this kind of sign. It's very kind of descriptive for the area. Our traffic signs are more triangular and square or rectangle, not too much round. So I liked it, and so the point is, I stood in the middle of traffic, praying that I didn't get shot to get my brackets, and this was a perfect case for HDR because that tunnel over here normally is pitch black. So if I were just exposed for here, you probably wouldn't have seen anything in the tunnel. This is the ship that I got on. Is it focal point? Actually, Jerry asks a good question. Is this shot focal point? No. So Jerry, this is with a tilt shift lens. I think this was my 17mm tilt shift lens, and I regret ever tilting my lens to begin with for the purposes of changing the plane of focus to blur out a certain part of the frame. In hindsight, I shoot everything now head on with my tilt shift lens. I use the shifting, I don't tilt, because I've become so adept with focal point. I'm so happy with the results of focal point. I could have gotten this exact look without a doubt in focal point, but at the very least I would have also had the opportunity or the option of having this entire shot in focus, tack sharp. So that's kind of my little spiel there. I'd rather use this, if the software is as intelligent as the lens itself. I know that everyone always says try to get everything right in camera, and that's true, but when you're tilting for effect, not for increasing your depth of field, then you know there's a very, very strong likelihood that you're going to miss your focus. Like if you zoom in here, it's not even that tack sharp, which is primarily because of tilting the lens. If I had shot this without tilting my lens, this would have been perfectly sharp. I just wanted to give you some context around what I was living on for 2 weeks. Yes, extremely dank place. No, not at all. This is the largest square rig sailing vessel in the world. I'm proud to have called this my home for 2 weeks. It was luxurious. It was excellent. For a 2-week jaunt around Italy, you couldn't have asked for a better home. And so I was really appreciative of that opportunity. Okay, we're almost done with this slideshow, and then we'll actually start processing images to give you ideas of how I would process. This shot here is more to illustrate the differences between perspective and lens choice. So this is a 15mm tilt shift lens. Now, tilt shift lenses, for the most part, I'm sorry, not tilt shift, 50 millimeter fisheye lens. I apologize. Fisheye lenses usually are used for distortion. However, based on the height, this is in Sorrento, one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And granted, I've only seen a limited number of places, but in my lifetime, I was amazed. My jaw dropped when I saw this place. I was about halfway up the wall that you can climb up, and it's just a staircase. There's no, it doesn't require too much exertion. But I shot it here just to get a sense of perspective, and to show you the difference between, your perspective in terms of where you're standing and the lens you choose. When I got to the bottom, same lens, I just went horizontal, but you can see the two totally different shots with the same lens, and all I did was just walked up and down a series of stairs and position my camera a little lower. So don't be afraid to experiment with the glass that you have. And also, to that point, don't rule out the option of renting glass. If I go on a vacation, say, depending on the type of vacation, if I don't already own a particular lens that I think would be really interesting, I'll rent it. Renting is an excellent option and an alternative from buying glass, because glass can be extremely expensive. So for just a small percentage of what it would cost to buy it, you can enjoy it for the amount of time that you go away. A fisheye is one of those things where I think everyone should own a fisheye. It's I've constantly called it the funk buster. If you're ever in a funk or you have some sort of creative block, just throw on the fisheye. Don't take any other lenses with you, and just walk outside, even just outside of your house. And I guarantee you that will get your juices flowing because of how wild the distortion is. The last thing that I'll leave you with, I think this is the last image. Nope. Sorry. This point here is don't be afraid to ask. The reason why I brought this image into the mix is because a lot of times when people go on vacation, they go on tours. Tours are typically not self-guided. You're on a schedule, and you have to kind of abide by the tour guide's lead. We were at this winery in Sicily, about an hour away from Giardini Naxos, if I remember correctly. And gorgeous, picturesque winery. The premises was amazing. They fed us amazing food, great wine. Everything was awesome. It wasn't until we were being rushed out that I kind of saw this door open. The store was closed. And I looked in and I saw these barrels. Now, this is a shot that absolutely would need some sort of high dynamic range processing, only because if you saw one of the original brackets, if I were to expose for these barrels here, you would have, not only would you have totally blown out sky, but you wouldn't see any of the pattern in the windows, and it would just bleed onto the walls themselves. So the point here is I essentially begged the tour guide. This was about a 4-minute combination of exposures from the brightest to the darkest. And I'm like, look, please. Essentially, while I was begging her, I was exposing. I kind of had everything set up, and she's like, we have to go, we have to go. Just do your best. Just ask, be polite, do not be confrontational about it. Thank God I got the exposures I needed, and we moved on. This is the last series of shots I'll show you. I think there are 2 shots, and it's basically talking about the benefit of buying neutral density filters. Neutral density filters, I've done entire webinars just on images using neutral density filters. It's essentially like sunglasses for your lens. That's how I try to explain it. It's taking a fairly opaque piece of glass, something that you would have to struggle to look through if you put it to your eye, and putting it in front of your lens. What this does is it forces your camera to take longer time to expose. So this is obviously the Colosseum in Rome. And any one particular shot here would have, to me, been not nearly as compelling as this one. Because if you were to take a quick exposure, all the people here would be frozen in place, and there was a gaggle of people. That's basically, what people are doing. It was a beautiful day in May. The weather was awesome. Actually, a massive storm was rolling in, which you'll see, I think, in the next shot. The clouds were coming in. But because I put my 10-stop filter in front of the glass, I got these cool combinations of moving ghosts. Some of them are somewhat still, and then others are perfectly still. So you have this really nice transition. I also got a very pleasing effect in the trees. Um, this is not ghosting per se. This is more like motion. This is an HDR image because I wanted to get the full tonality of the Colosseum, but I also preserved the deep shadows of the image to give it context. The only thing I couldn't do was get rid of this police car, so I just decided to keep it in, which was kind of a bummer because I wished it was gone. I tried cropping it out. I even tried content aware fill. Nothing was good enough, so I left it in there. It's the kind of trade-off. The other reason why neutral density filters work really well, these are the clouds that I was referring to, um, is because it's a great way to get rid of tourists. Now, in this shot here, I actually liked the tourists in here, but with this is the Forum, also kind of a few blocks away from the Colosseum, and the long exposure basically ghosted out all of the people that were walking. Due to the distance and the height that I was relative to this position, the scale was in my favor. You can see that this right here is the main pathway. If I zoom in, um, that's the pathway that the tourists would come by. And I left this one guy here. I just like this little ghost over here. Um, so these are just tips related to gear, tips related to how you should think. I was taking more of a documentary approach. It was my first time there. I have no problems getting a shot like this, which would probably, for someone who lives in Italy or someone who's visited Italy repeatedly, probably to me this is a very kind of standard postcard shot. For you know what I mean, like it's a gimme shot. I wanted this shot in my library of images. I've never seen the Colosseum, and so I have other shots, your typical shots from this angle here. So yes, get these out of the way if it's your first time visiting. Just get them. Doesn't matter if it looks the same. Once you get this shot out of the way, it will free your mind, your creativity. Trust me on this. It will free your mind to get more intriguing shots, more compelling shots. Now that your brain knows, okay, I've got this shot, I can focus on other things. So I'm a big fan of that. Just get the shot, get your head on shot, get it out of the way, and then move on. I'm going to just look at the questions before we begin here. Candace, really good point here. Candace brings out the point that this police car brings out some sort of a nice contrast in terms of time. This is an extremely historic vintage piece of architecture. This is a somewhat new, modern piece of technology, so it is a nice contrast. I agree with you there. I wish I could say that was my intention, but it wasn't. Are most of these shot in HDR, Raul? Yes, pretty much almost all of them are in HDR. Pearl is asking if I've ever been to Taormina on this trip. Yes, Taormina was part of the trip. I was there. It was beautiful. The castle on the Molar, Castel Molar. I can't remember the name of it, but it was gorgeous. John brings up an interesting point, or he asks a question: do you ever offer to trade photos with the tour guide or the tour company? I didn't because I didn't want to double dip. I was there for a particular purpose, and I didn't want to do any side dealings. However, that's a great point. If you need time, just go ahead and offer that up. If you're willing to do that, my point, here's a good point. This John brings up or allows me to segue to one last thing. If you're going to trade your work for access or time, please, as a photographer and just as a person with ethics, follow through. There were people in Italy that opened up their stores to us. They let us, their restaurants. They fed us. We shot. They essentially kicked everyone out. I'm not even joking. In Sicily, and gave the three of us access to their restaurant. They gave us a full course meal, and in return, we promised. It was totally on faith. We got their email information, and we promised we would send them the final results, each respectively, and we followed through. If you're going to do that, please do that, because what happens is if you don't, the next time another photographer goes to that restaurant, say, and says, "Hey, can I do that?" They will say, "No, I tried that." That actually happened to some of the the directors on the cruise, who were actually very, very pretty, and you wanted to shoot them, and they said, you know, we were promised this and that, and it was never delivered. And so what you're doing is you're kind of, you want to pay it forward. Adam's wondering the color, tonality, and presets. What do you mean? Are you asking how I worked on this? This image here, I could tell you right off the bat, this is an HDR image. Blue Dawn Leonidas and Photo Tools was used primarily, and then Golden Hour Enhancer and Just Enough Darkness. Golden Hour Enhancer on the trees, a little bit of Golden Hour Enhancer on the rock, and then Just Enough Darkness to kick up the shadows. And this one is pretty much the exact same process. I wanted a cohesive look to some of these images. Do I ever fear of being restricted entry to these sites with all of my gear, Jeff? You know, yes, I didn't fear it, but it did totally turn me off to Pompeii. They were the worst. The people there, not the people, the security guards there were the worst. They confiscated pretty much all of our gear. I couldn't bring my tripod, so I had to do everything handheld. And, you know, they basically put it in this locker with someone standing there. So I was freaking out about the security. That's a good point, too. Yeah, Perler saying that Pompeii and Ercolano do not allow many photographers. So it's a bummer because, and I understand why. Don't get me wrong, I understand why. These places have tons of tourists walking around. Tripods can be tripping hazards, but then again, so could the massive rocks that are just lying around everywhere. So take everything into context. All right, let's we'll go through all the questions too, I promise, guys. But I actually want to, instead of just me narrating, let's work on some images. I want to give you some ideas of stuff. All right. So this series of shots here, we're going to do an HDR image, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the brackets first. This was flew from Boston to Rome directly. Rome, took a shuttle down to the dock where the boat was was moored, and my very first day, this was the very first series of shots straight off of the boat. So it was just kind of a series of brackets on the island of Ponza. And you can see that we've got some issues. Notably, you can see that the boats are moving, something to be Pearl is saying that the reason that they want to own the photos for the books that they publish. Fair enough. Speaking of Pompeii, why they restrict photographers. All right, so you kind of want to be cognizant when you're shooting, especially if you're shooting anything that's marine or in a crowded area like the tourist back here, of movement, because this will be a recipe for disaster. You'll get a ton of ghosting. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to select these images here, and I'm going to use Photomatix for this example for the one reason that Photomatix has user-selective ghost reduction. So let's go here. Let's go to File. Actually, let's just right-click, and we'll go to Export, and we'll go to my Photomatix preset. And I'm going to turn on this Reduce Ghosting Artifact with Selective Deghosting Tool. And I'll just change the file name to -HDR, and we'll save it as a JPEG because we don't need to waste time on the. Next time we'll be in Pompeii, just tip the security guard. You know, I should have tried the tip. I didn't even try it because we made such a fuss. We made it quite a fuss, so we already had a crowd of people around us. All right, you can see here right off the bat that you can see the ghosting. If I it's kind of it's blurry over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Wacom tablet, and in Photomatix what you can do is you can draw selections. So I'm just drawing a selection around the entire body of water. And I'm just going to go right here over the flags and close it up. I'm going to mark this. If you right-click in your selection, and mark it as a ghosted area, it's going to try to deghost this. The way it's going to deghost it is if you right click and you go set from another photo for selection, you'll have your brackets here. You can actually choose to sample from any one of these exposures. So by default, it selects the -1 exposure. I'm going to hit preview deghosting to see if it's a good match, and that actually is a good match. I'm happy with that. You can see what it's doing. It's actually sampling the individual exposure. I'm also going to go to return to selection mode and make a selection around these people here because they were moving. Again, you have to right click, mark as a ghost the selection as a ghosted area, preview deghosting, and you can see that the people snap into place. So when you're happy, you can hit OK. And what it's going to do is that it's actually going to start tone mapping. Okay, so I've got my histogram up here, and I'm starting to look around, just analyze what this looks like if I'm happy with it. Right off the bat, I'm going to drop the gamma down, which is the brightness, because it's way too bright. I'm also going to fiddle around with luminosity and detail contrast. I'm also going to drop the saturation because it's a bit too saturated for me. I can always add saturation later on. Jerry, this is a standalone version of Photomatix. This is actually a private beta that hasn't been released yet. I'm just testing it out. So that's kind of what I'm using here. My white point I'll bring up a little bit. What I'm looking for is I want to make sure that in my histogram I don't have really any clipping. And you can tell that you have clipping if data on your histogram bunches up on the edges. You kind of want to prevent that. That's essentially what you're trying to prevent with HDR, is having too much clipping in either the shadow or the highlight areas. Larry, I can definitely go over how to set up a preset in Photo Tools. I'd be happy to do that with this image here. Let's see with the light. So essentially what I did was I brought my strength up to 100%, and the sliders I worked with here, just to give you an idea, the color saturation, because the colors were too punchy, I dropped it down. You can see if we bring it up, the blues here are a bit strong, so I'm going to drop it down a bit. The luminosity will bring out highlight details, so you can see if we bring it up high, it's just bringing out a lot of the wider highlight details. You want to be careful with that. Detail contrast is kind of like the localized contrast. You can see as we bring it up, it gives you some texture, especially in the shadow areas. The lighting adjustment here, this is typically what you would find with the overall strength of your light smoothing, your HDR effect. So you kind of, as you bring it to the left, you get what I would call a degraded image. You want to really avoid that. I typically hover right around the center. Also, if you in this version, you can see it's going to look slightly different. If you have this lighting effects, if you have these check boxes instead of a slider, turn the checkbox off, because this is what gives you the awful look to HDR. You want to really turn that off. The slider gives you a lot more control. So when you get to a point where you're happy, actually before I hit save and re-import, I want to show you the white and black points. This will basically define where your white point and your black point start. If you have clipped highlights or shadows, try adjusting your white point and your black point. So if you have clipped highlights, adjust your white point, and if you have clipped shadows, adjust your black point accordingly. So if I drop the white point down even more, that should remove any of that stray clipped highlight. Your gamma is your overall brightness. So if you bring it up, it makes the image brighter, and if you bring it down, it makes it darker. Depending on the image, you might you might choose to make it a little bit darker. However, I try to make the image a little bit brighter than normal, because when I process in Photo Tools, it typically will darken the image as it is. All right, so I'm going to hit Save and Re-import, and that'll bring the image back into Lightroom here. So here we've got the raw HDR image. And Emilio, no, Photomatics is not an On-One product. It's made by a company called HDR Soft. I believe yes, they're French. I don't know, Candice, when this version will be made available. Pretty soon. Um, so you can get the 4.0 version. That's out now. And this is, I think, 4.1. All right. I'm going to bring this now into Photo Tools. So I typically send my images to Photoshop first to access Photo Tools. So here we can go to the On-One palette, and I can go to Photo Tools. And I'll show you how to create a preset. All right, so now we start working on the image. Right off the bat, let's see what we can do. First thing I'm going to do is I might actually mask in this water back here. I'll see how it looks after the processing, but let's go to the stylized effects and let's try an effect called Moulin Rouge. All right, now when an effect comes in, it comes in anywhere between 70 and 100% strength, which oftentimes is very, very strong. So what I always recommend doing is starting at 0 and then bringing it up to a point where you're happy. And I like what this is doing to the image here. I just kind of like how it's affecting highlights. What I want to do next is warm up this image, or at least the foreground, by going to Golden Hour Enhancer. So let's add this to the stack. And the reason why I took the shot to begin with was because I liked the directionality. This to me was so novel, such a beautiful little town. And right up here, actually, if I zoom in, right over here, I think it's right over here. One of these stores on the second floor. Oh no, right here. That's the third floor. Right there is an amazing little pizza place. The owner is from New York City, so I was really fond of that because that's where I'm from, and so it was fantastic. John is asking if I ever use a painting effect or filters on any of my HDR images. I'm not sure. I'm not sure which effects you mean. I don't typically use any effects that make it look like a painting, if that's what you mean. Now, what I want to do really quickly, John, before we, if you elaborate, what I want to do is I want to paint out the warming effect from the sky. And that's one of the cool things about Photo Tools, is that you can elect where the effect is applied. So first, when the effect is brought in, bring it to 0 and bring it up until you're happy. Now I'm primarily focusing on the effect on the pavement and on the buildings here because it adds a really nice kind of glowing warmth. But I don't want it to warm the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this masking brush here and I'm going to paint it out. And you want to be kind of careful along these borders. Now, just for speed, I'm just kind of going quickly. I'd probably use more of a feather here, and I'd definitely go a lot slower. But to show you that just the difference of removing the effect from the sky, you restore some of that nice, cool, natural blue look to the sky. The watercolors, watercolors. No, I don't typically do that, John. I know what you're talking about now. But no, I don't typically add water. The closest I'll do is add an effect called pastel colors, which I'll do right now. But that even is not really on par with what you're saying, I think. The reason why I added pastel colors, and don't freak out yet, is because I know how it responds to certain colors in an image. And so when it comes in really strong. Drop it to 0 and just bring it up just a tiny bit. And it adds a nice multicolor dimension to the image. See, it's only 15%. But I do like it. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I might add Orton Here's a Who. Let's see, because this is going to add a nice Gaussian blur, but at a small amount. And then finally, just enough darkness because it's a bit too bright. I want to bring out some of the shadow texture. Drop that down. That's looking pretty good. In Lightroom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to desaturate these boats a bit because they're a bit too blue. But other than that, I'm actually pretty happy with this image. I like it. It's a good HDR image. It brought out a lot of the tonality, still retained shadows, which is important. Would I paint the warming effect out of the water, Andre is asking. Um, I could have if I wanted to. Let me see. It's not a bad idea. Let's see. If I go to the golden hour enhancer here, I can resume in case you know. And actually, Andre gives me an opportunity to bring out a little tip, so I do appreciate it. Let's say you got to this point here, you're done, and you're like, you know what, this is a bit warm. If you go back to the effect that had the warming, which is golden hour enhancer, you can continue. And right off the bat, Andre made the right call. I like it cooler, so you can continue masking. And when you are done and you activate the effects above it, it will incorporate this new mask. So there you go. Now we can go up here, and it'll take that into consideration. So good call on that. How would I desaturate the blue? I'll show you, Gary, right now. Let's hit apply. So we'll let Photo Tools do its thing. Let me see if there were any other questions in the meantime. Varol asks, how do I get to the selection mode in Photomatics? I'll show you that. Oh, and the lens that I use here is a 17mm tilt shift on my 5D Mark II. Ooh, Candace, good question. Candace is wondering what my travel post-processing setup was. This was a unique situation because this was a major production. So we actually had the Drobo with us, and some mean processing power. Normally, when it's just me, I have a 15-inch Apple MacBook Pro, 8 gigs of RAM. I have a Wacom. I have two Wacom tablets. I have an Intuos 4 medium and an Intuos 4 large. The medium is essentially the same exact size as the 15-inch laptop, so they sit flush next to each other. So those come with me wherever I go. I have an external FireWire 800 G-Tech drive, so all my photos are stored there. I also have a little Epson portable media backup player. You know what those are, guys? It's a little handheld device, has a compact flash slot and an SD card slot and a nice big LCD screen and a hard drive inside it. And so essentially you just put your card in, it automatically backs up. So I have 5 compact flash cards, 5 8-gig cards. I will not erase a card until I get back home, unless I need to, unless I run out of space. In which case, I back up nightly to my external hard drive. I back up nightly to that little portable media player. So I have 2 backups. Plus, I've got the images on the CF card. If I run out of CF card space, I will erase the oldest card. But I feel good knowing that I have 2 backups on the fly. Well, the Drobo is only because we took the Drobo because we were recording tons of video and we needed a huge hard drive array. What is the name of the Epson product? I'll show it to you at the end. We'll go on to Amazon. I'll show you what it is. Pat asks a good question regarding masking. And we can do this here in Photoshop to kind of illustrate. Pat's wondering this. So let's just say here, just for example, we've got the original HDR image here, and we've got the Photo Tools effect here. For whatever reason, let's say we want to bring this area back to the original image. So this is essentially what you're doing in Photo Tools. Pretend this is effect 1, or this is effect 1 and effect 2. If I want to remove this area and reveal the layer underneath it, I would use a masking brush. However, if I'm at a lower opacity, let's say I'm at a 40%, my brush is at a 40% opacity, one stroke will do this. If I let go, and if I keep coming back down, it'll compound on top of itself. Whereas if I'm at 100% opacity, it will remove the entire layer, that part of the layer. So Photo Tools is the same way. If you have your brush, your masking brush, at a lower opacity, anything under 100%, the brush strokes will be iterative, meaning they'll compound on top of each other. You have to keep stroking. If I press and hold and I just go up and down, it doesn't keep removing. If I press, let go, and press down again, it'll keep. Oh, I'm actually at 100% now. But if I press, let go, press again, you see how it's compounding until 100% of it's removed. So I hope that helps, Pat. Gary, I actually have all of my equipment listed on my website. I can show you that at the end for those that are interested. All right. And you know what I realized is I didn't show how to do presets. So let me show you something pretty quickly. Let's turn this off over here and let's go to this background. We'll go to Photo Tools. There's a pretty easy way to recall what you just did in Photo Tools. If you go to the Presets tab here and you go to the Recently Used option, this Photo Tools remembers the last 6 things that you did. So you can see here that this is what I did last, and if I add to stack, it'll add those effects in the order. Now that's not a preset, that's just recalling what you did. One caveat is when you bring this in, it does not remember the mask information. So you'd have to go back to Golden Hour Enhancer here really quickly and just paint out the sky. I'm not going to even bother right now because we have the layer in Photoshop. But let's say you like this particular look. If you remember earlier when we were doing the slideshow, I said that those 2 images of the Colosseum and the Forum I processed the same way because I wanted to create a series. This is how you can do that by ensuring that you have the same effects. So let's say you've got your effect stack here. This is the effect stack that you like. If you go to File and then Save Preset, you can save the preset so that it'll apply to any other image going down the line. So you put your name in. You could say this is Ponza look. You can change your category. You can say new category and say my Italy presets. Creator is me. Description use for all Ponza HDR images. And then you can choose to apply keywords which will allow you to search. So you just hit create. Now you've got your preset over here. And the cool thing is that if you go to File and then go to Show Presets folder, you can share this preset with anyone that has Photo Tools. I can give this to anyone. So let's say you get this PTO file. If you go to File and then Import Presets, just point it to that PTO file, and you'll have that preset. That's how I create expansion packs on our On1 blog. Photo Tools expansion pack presets. You could download them for free. That's all you do. Just looking at the questions. When you apply, can you always go back to previously used to get back in? What do you mean by that, Jeff? If you've closed the photo, so Bob's saying, what if you've closed the photo? Can you go back to your settings on another picture? Yeah, basically, if you go to, well, yes and no. If you go to your presets option here and you go to the recently used, it'll remember the last 6. So these are the last 6 images that I processed in Photo Tools. If I do 6 more images after this one, Photo Tools will ignore it. So what you can do is go to any one of these images, double click on the preset, it'll bring up those effects, and then you can save it so that it's its own preset now, and it won't go away. Yeah, once closed, so I could cancel. I hit apply before. You saw me hit apply. It's right here. And I just hid the layer. I went back into Photo Tools and went to recently used, and that's how I was able to bring it. Again, you have to remask. You would have to paint the sky out and the water out. But the order of the effects are retained and the strength of the effects. So if Golden Hour Enhancer was only at 20%, it will be at 20%. So that's cool too. And oh, so the images as well. So let's go really quickly into Photo Tools too. I want to just show you something. If you go to the way you can find out which one was which, these are the actual images that I hit apply for. So you can see the before and the after. And it saves that. The same thing will happen with the preset. Whatever image you hit apply with is the before and after preview. So if you give this to someone, they will see this image. they can see the before and the after, which is kind of cool because this is a good illustration of what this preset can do. So I hope that helps. All right, let's move on to this other image here. Now this image is of Paul, our DP, director of photography. The reason why I took this was because I am not in any way what I claim to be a, an avid portrait photographer. I admire portraits. I'm just not, it's not my thing. However, you go on vacation, you're going to shoot portraits. And I'm a big fan of not getting your typical family portraits, like look at the camera, make an awkward smile. Instead, be a photographer. Direct, your subject. So if you're shooting your kid or your wife or your husband or anyone. So I told Paul I found this really cool wall over here, and I asked Paul, hey, I want to get a shot of you, but I don't want you looking at the camera. Lean like that. I kind of wish he took off his gear belt, but that's neither here nor there. So that's kind of a goal. Yeah, actually, Andre's saying it's a great background for an overlay. I actually have this as a texture for overlays. Oh man, everywhere in Italy, just amazing texture. So now what we can do is now we can have some fun. Let's bring this again into the photo tools and let's have some fun. And I'll show you how I would process this, as well as what I would do to bring focus to Paul's face. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to first brighten his eyes. Let's go here and zoom out a bit because we don't want to look up his nose. And let's go to the Portrait Enhance category. And the first thing I'm going to apply is this effect called Magic Eye Fixer. Now you guys see this little pen icon next to the effect. That means that when you add it to the stack, nothing will happen. Instead, your masking brush will automatically turn on. Your mode will go into paint in. That's how the brush works, or how these effects with brushes work. You paint them in. So what I can do here is I can kind of just paint in the eyes because I want to brighten the eyes up a bit. And now when the stroke has been made, I'll hit Command or Control 0, which brings us back to a full screen view. And I can drop the effect to 0 and just see the strength. Whenever I apply the effect, I like to zoom in so that I make sure I get just the eyes. But when I'm adjusting the strength of eyes, I like to zoom out because you can see the full context. So get it to a place where you're happy. Brings out his eyes. That's good. And really, that's about one of the only things I would apply here. A lot of these effects here are better for female models than male models. So Paul, obviously, you can see he's got his beard going on, and I don't want to smooth that out. I want to retain that texture. So I'm not going to really. We don't have a clean shave effect yet. Oh, John, I'll share that. That's a good tip too for that. I'll share. John gave me a good idea, so thank you for that. And it's good to share with everyone about alternatives to tripods. All right, so what we could do is if we go to the basic brushes, let's say we want to accentuate that the scruff. We can go to Brush More Dynamic Range. Again, we're under the first category called Basic Brushes. Let's add to the stack. And let's just paint in, we'll zoom in a bit, just on the scruff. And you should be able to see that it brings out a lot of nice texture, and you can go crazy with that. That doesn't look good. Let's just bring it up a bit, and then let's start painting out some of the areas under his lip, or over his lip. Right here, we went too wide, and across his cheek. But I do like how it's bringing out some of the texture of the, Paul's a manly guy, and so you want to kind of. He actually looks like a local. I love it, just that look that he's got. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to black and white. I want to convert this to black and white, and so I'm going to try this Kev Secret formula. Nope, I don't like that at all. Sometimes you see an effect, you'll know right away if you like it or if you don't like it. So the next one I'm going to try is Mac GW Warm. see how this works. I dig that. Let's I'm actually going to keep it slightly desaturated. I'm not going to go 100% black. But let me see if I want his skin tone back. Let's bring it up a bit, even higher, and then let's use a masking brush. We'll paint out, but we'll drop the opacity to about 60%. Now let's restore some of that skin tone. Just a bit. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah, I like that. That to me is looking pretty cool. And now let's hit apply. Do I want to do anything else here? I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can do. No, let's not overdo it. Oh, I didn't get his ears. Oops. Okay, that's okay for now. Thanks for that roll. Um, See, that's why I'm not into portraits because I would forget things like that. Also, I'm red-green colorblind, and sometimes seeing skin tone is a bit hard. So I try not to. I always have to ask my wife or someone else, like, is the skin tone natural or is it too ruddy? The next thing I'm gonna do is go to focal point. So focal point is actually a really fun way to kind of bring focus to a face. I'm gonna reset our settings here so that if you go to Edit and Reset All, if you're learning focal point, I recommend doing this as your first step every time. Just go to Edit, Reset All, and it'll bring everything back to the standard settings. So I'm going to take my round bug and I'm going to kind of shape it to his face. And this is a little technique I got from Scott Stolberg. He's one of our On1 masters. He's a very cool guy and a great photographer. He said, try putting a round bug, shape it to the face, bring the feather to 100%. So that creates a very, very smooth transition. Now, obviously this is way too strong. So let's drop the amount of blur significantly. You almost don't want it to be apparent. Like right now I'm at 3%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my masking, the focus brush here. Instead of a masking, it actually paints focus in and out. I'm going to paint focus at a very, very low opacity to get the top of his hair in a little bit more focus. And again, because I'm at such a low opacity, it's going to require several strokes. And so once you get to a point where you're happy, now you can start doing things like dropping the brightness of the out of focus area and boosting the contrast. And what that's doing is it's helping to draw focus right to the face. And so this now is giving you a very, very compelling shot. This is kind of what I'm liking. This is looking like a pretty cool portrait. And you can do this with anyone. You know, it's not like he's a model or anything special. He just kind of did what I asked him to do. I think all I said was don't look at the camera. So now we can add a vignette. And there we go. Here was our original image, or at least our Photo Tools image. And then that's with Photo Tools, or with Focal Point. So we can hit apply. Just a cool way to get a shot, you know, memorable shot. And the styling that we did in Photo Tools is totally subjective. We could have gone one of 1,000 different ways. Now, Andre was saying that he notices I don't do much sharpening in Photo Tools. Do I do sharpening in output only? No, I'll do sharpening. Let's save this image. I'll do sharpening in Lightroom. And then if I'm outputting for print, I'll go to perfect resize for final sharpening. So in Lightroom, if you go to the develop module, you could, where's my sharpening? There's my sharpening. You could do global sharpening, which I don't normally do. What I like to do is go to in Lightroom 3, you've got an adjustment brush. So I'll go here, I'll drop down my effect to sharpness, bring sharpness up, sometimes bring clarity up with it, a tiny bit of brightness and a tiny bit of contrast. And so like I would probably sharpen Paul's face, brings it out a little bit more. I might also, in this case here, create a new brush, go to brightness, drop it down very subtly, and just kind of darken this area here because I saw a little bit of a halo going on with the focus brush that I did, because I brushed in the hair and it brought in some of that brighter focus. So that kind of smooths that out a bit. And then, so yeah, let's say for instance, now I wanted to print this. I would go from here, I'll just go to File, Plug in Extras, Perfect Resize. I'm going to edit a copy, or you could do the original. Here I'll just do a TIFF file, Pro Photo. I'll just keep it 8-bit, and I'm going to work with the standalone. So Perfect Resize, Photo Tune, Focal Point, Photo Frame, and Perfect Layers operate as standalone products, meaning you don't even need Photoshop. So I always work in those products. Unless I'm in Photoshop already, I'll just work as a standalone. And what this will do is it'll launch Perfect Resize. So let's say I wanted to print this as a 24 by 36 poster. It'll automatically resize it. It's a 432% increase in size. Now we have sharpening. You have to turn sharpening on, and then I'll go through. Usually I'll do probably a high pass or a progressive, but you want to be very careful. Whenever you sharpen for output, I typically like to hit this 1:1, and that'll actually give you a full view, pixel view of the image. So I'm just waiting for it. I'm going to position the navigator square over Paul's face because that's my primary focus. Okay. And now you can start working on sharpness. You can go through the different methods here and see the differences in the sharpening methods. You also have the amount, which is your overall strength, and the ability to preserve highlight and shadows, which is awesome. I don't think that's available in the unsharp mask. Oh no, it is. Good, cool. This is, yeah, these sliders here allow you to protect your highlights and your shadows from being over sharpened. So you basically adjust this accordingly. The unsharp mask is basically what you would find in Photoshop. But the key is the enlargement algorithm, the technology to enlarge. So this is a 432% increase in an image. And I can tell you that the fractal technology here is outstanding. So if we go back to the full view, I mean, you have no loss in detail whatsoever. Can you go back and adjust focal point once applied? Adam asks. Yes, you can. If focal point is currently the only Perfect Photo Suite product that supports smart object, so you can convert that layer into a smart object and then go back and readjust it. Craig's wondering, do you always print out of Perfect Resize? Yes, Craig, I do. Let me rephrase. I will always print out a Perfect Resize when I'm printing, say, a canvas or I'm enlarging an image. Always, without a doubt. I've done that before I even worked it on when it was Genuine Fractals. It was just the best product. It's the best product for image enlargement. And one of the other cool things, in case you're not familiar with the product, is this gallery wrap. We went over this on our On1 clinic last week. I can turn this on, and if I want to print this as a canvas, it'll actually give me a preview of the stretcher bar area. So the way a canvas works is you print your image, and then part of the image is wrapped around the wooden frame, the stretcher bar. Without having this gallery wrap, you basically either leave it to the original composition will get stretched over, or you leave it to the printer to do it for you. In this case here, you can adjust it by recropping and see exactly what's going on. You can also blur. If you change the method from reflect to reflect soft, it'll actually blur, so it'll soften that edge a little bit. Yeah, I don't do any other sharpening, Larry, in Photoshop. I'll do it in Lightroom, like I'll sharpen a specific area if I want it. But I don't usually use Lightroom to do global sharpening. I'll use Perfect Resize for my global sharpening because it's got 3 different methods and I can choose the one that works best based on the image. So I hope that helps. And actually, if you go to the On1 Software website and then go to our product videos, under Perfect Resize, we have videos that go over specifically the differences in these 3 methods. So it'll give you a better education around it. All right, so that's what I would do. with this image here. All right, let's see. Did I save that final image? I didn't. That's a bummer. I would have processed it here. Let me see. What's this? Oh, I'll show you this image here, and then we can conclude because I don't want to keep you guys if you have to go anywhere. We're already past the hour, which I'm fine with. Oh, here, good question. Jerry brings a good question. Do you turn off output sharpening? Very good question. All right, so let's go to this image here. Here's our final image. Where is it? Is this it? Yeah. Here's our final image of Paul. Now, what what Jerry asked was, do I turn off the output sharpening in Lightroom? So in case you don't know what we're talking about, if you go to File Export in Lightroom, and you choose to export to a file, for instance, there is an output sharpening drop down here, and you can choose to add some sharpness for screen, for matte, or for glossy. 95% of my work, it's total arbitrary percentage. I just wanted to kind of illustrate that just every image that I output out of Lightroom is primarily digital. It's for my blog, it's for the On One website, it's for these webinars. For those situations, I use Lightroom to sharpen for screen high. So it'll add a sharpening algorithm. If I'm printing, I will turn this off, and I will use perfect resize, and I will export it, without any sharpening. So that's a great question. I do like the sharpening method here. I like it because it does a good job and it's streamlined within my workflow. I don't need to do anything else. I could just send it out with a sharpen. But images should be sharpened. You should always sharpen for the intended output. So the Lightroom algorithm suffices for me for web. The perfect resize algorithms are far superior when I want to put it onto print, especially Canvas. I love to me, Canvas is my favorite medium. So that's just, different strokes. All right, last image here is panoramics. So these are 3 images that I took in a church. Now, you go to Europe, you go to Italy, you go France, the churches are gorgeous. I can, if you're into architecture, you need to, you'll be amazed at the architecture here. So what I did was I walked up to, I can't remember, I think it was a pastor there. There was someone there who was working in the church, and I asked, would it be okay if I took photos in here? I'll be quiet. And he said, well, he's like, take a picture. So I stood there. My camera was on a tripod, and I took a picture. And the slapping of the mirror was so loud. I mean, the acoustics in here were amazing. So it just, ka-chink, and went all the way through the church. And so I said, okay, how about this? And again, this is about knowing your gear. I just turned mirror lockup on. Mirror lockup essentially locks the mirror upward, revealing the sensor. So you will get that first slap of the shutter going up. But once the mirror's up, the subsequent exposures will be silent, or there'll barely any noise, a tiny little click. So that's what I did. The mirror lock went up. I took my exposures, and everyone was happy because I wasn't causing distraction. As you can see, there were people, albeit a few, middle of the day praying. And I do not want to be, that typical, rude guy, photographer man who comes in and just a bull in a china shop. So just be cognizant of that. Respect the local tradition. Churches are ripe for photography. And if it's the type of church, there were churches that we went to that were riddled with tourists, so that's okay because they're already making noise. But here, this was in Sorrento, right at the top of that mountain, that kind of canyon that I showed you with that curved road. Right at the top into the, if you're facing the curved road, make a right, and it's basically right there. Um, So here's the left exposure, middle exposure, right exposure. I took this panel with my tilt shift lens. I essentially shifted my lens from left to right. And what this did was it preserved the straight lines. Whereas if I used a regular lens and I panned my camera from left to right, you would start getting this kind of curvature over here because that you're tilting your perspective. But because my perspective was locked and I was just shifting, my camera was not moving. The lens was just moving on a level plane horizontally from this left side to this right side. I ended up with this, and so this is the stitched image. Now I use a product called, I think it's called AutoPan Giga. It's expensive, but it's worth every penny. And I'll show you the product. I will go to the website. I also believe it's a French company. Um, and Candace is right. Respect is key. If you're respectful, if you're humble, if you just ask very kindly and just throw yourself on the mercy, usually it'll pay off. But if you just assume, don't assume. Don't walk into someone's store and just start shooting without asking first. Have a bunch of business cards ready. Um, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just a piece of paper, a business card with your information that you can give to the owner, so they have some sort of information on how they can get in touch with you. That's important. That'll establish some sort of trust. All right, so let's take this image and we'll bring it into Photoshop so we can stylize it. And you can see here that everything looks straight. It's beautiful, gorgeous church. Let's go into this here, photo, edit in Photoshop, and now we can stylize it. So let's go into Photo Tools, and I'll tell you something. So I actually published this image on my blog a while ago, 6-7 months ago. Once you work on an image and you publish it, you kind of you don't ever touch it anymore. It kind of just, all right, done, archived. And that's why I love being able to do these webinars with you guys, because it gives me an opportunity. I don't do the same things over and over. I try not to. Like, I don't even remember what I originally did with this image. And I'm happy with that because now we're going to experiment and actually have an idea to do something that I didn't do before. So I recommend doing that as well. Don't ever give up on an image. You learn techniques, you attend these webinars, you attend other webinars, you go to Photoshop World. You learn new things. Go back and reapply your lessons because you never know. You can make it even better. And now you have a redux. So let's go here. Let's go into the lighting, or the stylized effects rather, and let's apply Blue Dawn Leonidas. Now I'm going to kind of pay for this because Blue Dawn Leonidas is one of those effects that when you hit apply, it takes a while. So I'll let it take a while and we'll answer questions. And I'm looking here and I'm trying to see what I like about Blue Dawn Leonidas. And specifically, I like what it does to the tiles here. I really don't care for what it's doing for the rest of the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really quickly just do a blanket paint out of the top. And it's going to get rid of some of the pew stuff, no problem. Again, we're not going for accuracy here because it would take a decent amount of time. Totally possible to do. Just, I'd have to sit there and be very, very deliberate with my strokes. But I like what it's doing here. All right, I'll paint in the pews because they're bothering me. I want the pews to be uniform. Okay, now what we'll do is let's add a little bit of Thermopylae could give us something good, but it might be against the grain with the church. It's okay. I kind of like it. Not really. I don't like the tint it's giving me. So I'm going to try Sun Glow. I like that. That kind of adds a nice glow to the image. Let's drop it to 0. We don't need that much of it. And Golden Hour Enhancer. Or Orton. Let's do Orton because that'll add some nice saturation to the colors. Drop it down here. Okay, let's pretend that this is our image. Let's hit apply. And I want to go into focal point and see what we can do. Do I know what the maximum lateral shift of the lens is? Um, oh, that was quick. Wow, that was faster than I thought. Yeah, Jerry, we'll go to a website here that will give us that information once we're done. All right. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to reset everything. I want kind of a planar bug. I'm going to go round, change the shape from round to planar, and I'm just going to kind of put the focus bug here. Drop the opacity or the feathering a bit. And now we're going to drop the amount of blur. I'm also going to change the tilt of the focus bug. If you put the cursor in the body of the bug, so the body of the bug is the center shape. Planar is square, round is circle. If you press the Option key in a Mac or the Alt key in a PC and drag up or down, it changes the tilt. All right. So now we're starting to get somewhat of a perspective change. I'm going to drop the amount even more because it's a bit too blurred in the foreground. And I'm going to increase the overall size of the bug so that we have more of a transition. Okay. Now what I can do is I'm going to take my focus brush. I'm going to paint focus on the arch here because I want that to be in total focus, and I want the altar to be in focus. Actually, I want this whole entire area here to be in focus. So I'm just kind of painting in iterations, getting it to a place where I'm happy. And now what we can do is let's see if we drop the brightness a bit, boost the contrast, and bring the highlight bloom up. The highlight bloom will brighten the specular highlights. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll add a vignette. Oops. So that's looking pretty cool. In my opinion, you kind of get your eyes through the frame. And if it's still too much blur, you can sometimes when you're this close to the edge, it's a bit hard to bring it down. So you can click on the number here and we can go down to like 4. That's looking good. That's looking magical right here. That's looking gorgeous. So we'll hit apply. And this is not something I didn't do in the original iteration of this work. And it didn't even totally different photo tools effects as well. If you, I mean, I posted it a while back, but it looks totally different, and everything was in focus. Focal point is good also. Let's say there were a few people here in the foreground, they would actually be rendered in a very nice blur. You would see them there, but they wouldn't have sharp edges, which would mean that it wouldn't distract from the eye going to the center of the frame. Now, what we could do is save this image. Go back into Lightroom here. We can go to the Develop module, go to the Adjustment brush, and I'm going to bring the brightness up a bit and kind of just paint in this area here and these highlights, just because I want the eye to be led in. Also bring the contrast up and the clarity. So that's looking pretty cool now. And I might even bring a stronger vignette. Under the effects palette, if you drop the post-crop vignette down and preserve highlights, there we go. So I think that's looking pretty cool. Can I show the mask? Which mask, Andre? Oh, in Lightroom? Is that what you mean? Oh, and focal point. I already exited out and I didn't save it as a smart object, so I won't be able to do that. I apologize for that. Jerry, email me about your issue. I'll give you my email address. All right. Let me see right here if there's anything else. All right. I'm gonna I think I'd be done with this image. I don't think there's anything else I would do overall. I've got another image, but we'll save this for, I think we're doing another Italy. I've got plenty of more images to do, but I don't want to take up too much time. Instead, what we'll do is let's go through some of the websites to cover some of the products. Um, I think it was Jerry who brought up the arm. That's the problem with these questions. The questions module is there's so many good questions. I'm trying to find the. Oh, here we go. John brought it up. Uh, it's here. If you go to Scott Kelby's blog, let's do a Google search. Scott Kelby, tripods are banned. Here. So I'm going to put this URL in the chat module so that you can see the product. There is a very cool product that he kind of brought out there. It's kind of this, actually RC brought it up. It's this like arm, this swivel arm. And I have one of these as well, and they're awesome. I didn't have it for Italy though. You can see that this is kind of a large uh, blown up shot. It's this is at the top of the Empire State Building, and instead of having a tripod, he bought this grip with a Manfrotto arm that allows him to kind of attach it to the fence. It allows his camera to get through the fence also, so you don't have any of the fence in the shot. So if you go to that, click on that website, you'll see the the gear. You just Gary's asking how do you save as a smart object and focal point? You just convert that layer into a smart object. Candace is wondering if I can post my gear, the travel post-processing gear on my website. Sure. I think if you go here, if you go to my website is just my name, it's brianmatiash.com. And if you go to additional resources, I have a thing here called My Gear, and I listed, this is basically everything I own. I think it's up to date. I don't think my Drobo's on here, but actually it's not up to date. But this is, when I'm traveling, depending on where I'm traveling to, I'll either take everything or I'll take a smaller percentage of it. But Candace, I can also email you directly and let you know what I got. There was a question earlier about the lateral distance. This website, thedigitalpicture.com. I'll put it in the chat module as well. The digital-picture.com. This place is outrageous for lens reviews for Nikon and Canon. And so it actually has, if we scroll down a bit, this is again the 17mm tilt shift lens. This is pretty much, I shot with this exclusively in Italy. This is tilt. I'm just looking for shift. This is, where's shift? Maybe I've skipped it. Oh, here we go. Oh, this is the preview. Yeah. I said, oh, actually, this is a good illustration of what I did in the church. I started at 0. I shifted my lens to the left, and you can see how it's kind of giving you that wider perspective. So it looks like it's 12mm in either side. And then I went to the right, and I took my brackets of each side, and I tone mapped them 3 times. And then stitched it. Oh, and stitching. So the product I have here that I use is called Autopan Giga. Autopano Giga. I'll put a link here. It's kind of pricey, but yeah, I find it to do an excellent job. You can do it in Photoshop. It's built into Photoshop. And the Epson product. Cool. Oh, their website is slow. If we go to Amazon, we'll go to Epson because I don't want to sway anyone from buying from one place or another. If we go to Epson and we go to North America, USA is where I'm from, and we'll go to where would it be? Scanners, ink, paper media, view other products. There it is, digital photography. Oh, I didn't know that they sell this X-ray color checker passport. I cannot recommend this enough. The X-ray color monkey photo. This is what I use to calibrate my displays. Here is what I'm talking about. They're pricey, but they're real, and you can get cheaper ones. There are other companies that make them, but the only reason why I have this is because it was given to me as a gift. Um, it's a display. So the P7000 is, I think, their higher end one, and it's got I think 120 gig hard drive, 160 gig hard drive with a nice big display. So you can see here, here's your compact flash slot, here's your SD slot. You just plug your card in, it'll automatically start backing up, and you can. The nice thing is, I would go through at night and just delete the images that were not good. It's a big enough display, plus you could zoom in and out that I can get a good idea if there's a shot that's just not worth keeping. Yeah, Candace says she's got the P4000. It's painfully slow. That's one of the things I think they fixed with the later versions. I want to say that there's a P8000, but I could be wrong. Um, but they're supposed to be faster. No, there is no P8000. Okay, P7000 it is. So yeah, they're pricey. Um, and again, there are other companies that make them. All it is just a hard drive with a little LCD around it. But it's worth it if you. I would not recommend investing in this if you're not going for a major trip. Like, I don't normally use it. If I go out for a day or two, or a weekend, I don't take it with me because um, I really don't need the backup. I'll back it up. I usually have my laptop with me, and I'll back it up to that. But if you're going for an extended amount of time, then I would probably recommend investing in this. Otherwise, it's just overkill. All right, I think. Let me see if there are any other questions. The iPad. So Bert is saying, what about the iPad? I assume you mean get the camera accessory kit and then back up to the iPad. Definitely viable. Except I've got the 32 gig iPad 2, and when I'm traveling a lot, usually I'll fill it with movies and other stuff. I don't usually have a lot of free space on it. It kind of makes me regret not just getting the 64 gig one. I just didn't want to spend $1,000 for it. Um, but definitely viable. You can go if you go to Apple's uh, website and you go to the store. Go to iPad. Where are the accessories? iPad accessories, and there's an iPad camera kit, which I'm trying to find. There it is. The iPad camera connection kit. You get two dongles. One of them is a USB and one of them is a SD card. Why they don't make a CF card one is beyond me, but you would just connect your camera to the USB, or if you have an SD card, then you're golden, and it will offload. Raul just got a 5D Mark II 5 days ago. How do I like it? Oh, Raul, I had the 5D Mark II the very first day it was available. I was neurotic about getting it. I love it. It's a fantastic camera. Not the best camera if you need to do a lot of fast action autofocusing stuff. The 5D Mark II has a pretty weak autofocusing system, but I don't do much of anything with action, so I'm okay with it. The newer, whatever the refresh will be, will definitely have the same autofocusing system as the 7D, but that's just a editorial comment. I think I covered all of the gear and everything. If I'm missing anything, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just finish this up.